This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hey there, I am Marina Ormes, and I'm here with my friend Sherry. Say hi, Sherry.
Hi, I'm Sherry Horn Hassan with Karmic Evolution Astrology.
And we're coming together because we had such a fun time doing a conversation together about the upcoming year last year that we thought this would be really fun to do again, and we're hoping to do it more regularly. So I'm Marina Ormes, the founder of Astrology Heals. You can find me at astrologyheals.com, and my friend Sherry here, you can introduce yourself.
Sure. I am at karmicevolution.com. That's my website. I have a weekly podcast called Karmic Evolutions Astrologically Speaking. So if you go to karmicevolution.com, you'll see podcasts on the upper right-hand portion of the banner, and you can feel free to click and listen live or listen to old recordings. But I try to give you the astro news you can use every week with a backgrounder of the slower moving energies, which is what we're going to talk about now, right?
What we're going to talk about today is a couple of things. We were going to talk about the recent exact Jupiter-Neptune conjunction that I've spoken about. I think Sherry has spoken about as well, but we're going to have a little conversation here about that and what's going on with the Jupiter, Neptune, and all the planets that are in Pisces right now.
Right.
And then we were going to talk about also the upcoming eclipses, and we're heading into eclipse season. So what's going on with that? And I'm excited to talk with you again, Sherry, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, same here. So let me ask you, because, my orientation is I'm not a mundane astrologer. I'm a psychological and an evolutionary one. But you, I know, are more aligned with health, and holistic healing. So, what's your take in general on the Jupiter-Neptune energy? Because I think you and I both would agree that it's not over because it happened. It's triggering things. So we had a lead up to it. And so how do you see it in terms of health, healing, all that kind of stuff, especially in the wake of, well, it's not over yet, but, the pandemic and things like that?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. My perspective is holistic healing, which is really mind, body, spirit, emotion, and looking at the things that we go through as evolutionary impulses, the invitations to transform, to heal ourselves, and healing ourselves. Even though we might be dealing with a health issue, the healing is happening on multiple levels, mind, body, spirit, emotion, and goes hand in hand with evolutionary astrology, which is what we've both, that's how we both approach astrology, is through the lens of human evolution, evolution of consciousness, evolution of our self-awareness, and one of the big things that I want to bring up today is just how when we're looking at astrological energies, it's not a doom and gloom kind of situation. It's always an invitation. So when we're looking at the state of the world, when we're looking at what's going on, and Jupiter, Neptune energies can kind of bring up these themes of illusions, fantasies, delusions, conspiracy theories, propaganda, and sometimes there's this feeling, especially, you know, some of the clients I've been talking to, of just like, well, the state of the world is just terrible, and and that's, you know, there's an element of truth to that for sure. But what is it asking of us? What is it? How is it asking us to step up? And what is the possibility and the potential here? Because we could give up. That's one option for sure. But is that really how we want to see this and how we want to approach this? So, so in general, yes, I definitely see it as something that is, inviting us to see who we are, what we're capable of, how we can understand ourselves better.
Yeah.
And your perspective is also evolutionary. So
well, my perspective is evolutionary, but I also bring the psychological aspect to it. But they overlap, because to me, why does one engage in a psychological process if one isn't trying to become more conscious about one's life, one's self, one's thought process, and what influences one, right? And you and I know that. I think it's a good marriage between psychological and evolutionary astrology, because what we think and what we believe, and I like to say, it's more of a Saturnian principle to me, the conscious ego, what we were told, taught, or forced to believe, doesn't necessarily come from inside of us. It comes from external factors. And those factors had to do with what kinds of lives we lived before, what were the influences on them, and what shaped the way that we perceive our life now, right? So we have to understand kind of, that they're really interrelated. But I want to talk a little bit about, I think the archetypes, right? Because Jupiter represents higher education. It represents law. It represents foreign ideas and concepts, which is why it's related to travel, particularly foreign travel. And it's related to religion, but the way that I connect religion is through morality, right? So Jupiter is, at least in the modern world, the last, 3, 4, 5,000 years, monotheism, right? We think in terms of morality, right? So we create the 10 commandments, or we're handed the 10 commandments, or however one wants to look at it, and they become codified into law, especially in the Western world. So monotheism, that's the beginning of monotheism, and the 10 commandments and all of that. So it's kind of like Jupiter's the moral code by which we live, right? But it's also the planet of expansion. And the way that I always talk about it with my clients is it's really all about expansion of consciousness. It's not like, oh, I want to expand my abundance, or, oh, I want to expand my family, or, oh, I want to, expand my land, or whatever. I always say that Jupiter doesn't give us necessarily what we want. That energy gives us what we need. And combined with Neptune, which is about, spirituality at its highest, Neptune to me is just so easily described by phrases, some of which are biblical and some are not, is there but for the grace of God go I, or walk a mile in another's shoes, or no man is an island. There's just this collective connection that we can't really sever. So we have the choice with this particular conjunction, especially in Pisces, which both planets rule, Jupiter traditionally and Neptune in modern astrology, to enhance and expand our consciousness. Or why are we here? What is my life about? What is my purpose, my true purpose, Or we can expand the lower side energies that particularly have to do with Neptune and its rulership over Pisces, which is illusion, and you alluded to this, confusion or delusion. So it's sort of like we can think of ourselves a little bit, given what you were saying about conspiracy theories and, the influence of things like social media over the past couple of years on how people feel politically or how they feel religiously, or, you know, dividing us into different groups, you know, that we are at a crossroads in a sense, because we can decide what we truly believe. And what we truly believe isn't to be influenced by that Saturnian told for us to believe, or my father did it that way, so, you know, my grandfather before him kind of thing, right? We have to think for ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's so well put. And we have the expansion of consciousness that's inviting us to open our hearts, open our minds to bigger possibilities. And you're talking about beliefs and what is guiding us, what we're sort of hitching our wagon to. What star is it that we're going to hitch our wagon to as we decide to move forward? And there's this, if we lose our grounding, if we forget to stay anchored in what's important to us and why we're doing this, in what we want to create for the future, then we can get lost. We can easily get lost, just like someone getting lost in addiction, or you know, altered states, or, you know, kind of losing touch with reality. That can happen through what it is we're believing, or spending our time thinking about, spending our time engaging with.
Yeah, I mean, there can be a lot of fantasy involved. I would call it wishful thinking.
Yeah.
You know, to bring it down to a more like mundane, normal level, right? We all are like, well, I wish, you know, he would do this, or I could do that, or, you know. But the question is, how realistic is that? And does Jupiter expand the wishful thinking? Or again, does Jupiter expand the fact that maybe, unless, as you just said, unless the wishful thinking can be grounded in something practical and concrete. Oh, I'd like to travel, you know, to wherever right now. So do I have the money to buy the plane ticket? Am I going to go by myself? Do I know the language? You know, those are the practical concerns. So if you're just dreaming about something happening, which many of us do, you know, Venus will be approaching conjunction to Neptune. I forget the date, but I think it's next week. And, you know, that's a very rose-colored glasses kind of energy, you know. So I think some of that energy could also be around our heroes, you know, who is going to save us. And, you know,
absolutely. And so much of like the things that are wrong with the world, you know, we want peace, you know, we don't want oppression, we want social justice, we want the pandemic to end. These things that we can put our wishful thinking into can become something that we're actively working to create by staying anchored in what's the dream, but also what are the practical steps that I need to do, and coming back to, why am I doing this? What is the reason for me to get up in the morning? What is the reason for me to have this, you know, difficult conversation with my coworker today, or whatever it is?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think it's important to point out too. I mean, there are two things, right? One is that Jupiter is, as I said before, and you know, is related to religion, right? So, you know, I know that a lot of astrologers is like, Jupiter's the great benefic and he brings blessings and all that. But you want to look to a certain extent at what's attached to the Jupiter in your chart, okay? Because it might not be all that wonderful, but it just means that those are perhaps some of the challenges that your soul incarnated into this lifetime to face. So, but on the other hand, if we look around and we talk about Jupiter, Neptune, and Pisces as triggering a time of greater unity, but yet when we perceive what's going on and we see, all we see is disunity and literal war. And I don't think literal and metaphorical war, right? Because at least here in the US, we've got a ton of partly metaphorical war, you know, the U.S. Capitol insurrection not included. That was a literal, but
Right.
in the Ukraine and all that. So I think that what's happening is the universe, in its attempts to, teach us and show us and give us these choices so that we become more conscious about our own personal truths, is showing us the divisiveness of Jupiter. So half the world is empathic. I have a friend who told me, after the beginning of the Ukrainian war, that her friend in Jersey just volunteered her home to a Ukrainian refugee, so it's like it's moved so many people so much, right? But it doesn't stop the war.
Yeah.
So, the divisiveness of Jupiter is almost like what's being highlighted here. And it's almost like, I feel like, on one way of looking at it is that the divisiveness of Jupiter, which is the lower end manifestation of Jupiter energy, is leading to greater unity, which is the higher manifestation of Neptune energy, but it's kind of like they have to balance,
Right. Yeah. I mean, when you're saying that, it makes me think of how Jupiter can make you feel full of yourself.
Absolutely.
It can feed that bubble of expansion of whatever it is you've latched onto, negative or positive, and that that you can be completely convinced that you're right, which is the dark side of Jupiter, and that Neptune energy that can disconnect you from reality, lose touch with what grounds you, or what's the here and now, and then following that energy of what is it that's being invited of us? How can we expand? How can we open our hearts? How can we open our minds? And what is the way forward that if we shift our consciousness to the ability to step back and see what's happening and see that we are all one, and that we are all connected, and that we do really, as human beings, all, have the same, at least share the same desire for, life and connection to our families and those things that unify us.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things I just want to mention that I talked about on my podcast last week is that I looked up some of the things that happened the last time Neptune and Jupiter conjoined in Pisces, which, believe it or not, was 166 years ago. So it was 1856. And one of the things that I thought was pretty fascinating is that there was a Crimean War between 1853 and 1856.
I read about that, yes.
And it involved the church. So there's your religious theme. I thought, what an interesting parallel, number one. And number two, just in more recent days, even though the Russian invasion of Ukraine started on February 24th, we've had the Russian Orthodox Church stepping in and backing the propagandist, or those of us in the West know is, what's propagandist stuff coming out of the Kremlin. So it's really interesting. The other thing, I looked it up in Wikipedia, and there was a line, and it was just so weird that it said something like the actual spark for the war is still under confusion. Like what actually started the armament part of it. And also that there's a quote here. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. It was something about that the butchery of the war, So, I mean, there's no doubt that we're seeing a replay or a recurrence of that.
It's very grounded in history, and history that goes way, way back. And And, you know, it's interesting that the year 1856 and our own Civil War here and what was brewing and stewing at that time. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's just so many threads to explore, but I want to make sure that we move on and just looking at our time here. So, so we were also going to talk about the eclipse. The upcoming eclipse in we have on April 30th a solar eclipse in Taurus, and then following it, what is the date? May
16th.
16th, yeah, a lunar eclipse in Scorpio, all with these Pisces energies still happening in the background.
Right.
So yeah, so you spoke last time we came together, you spoke quite a bit about the nodes shifting and from Sagittarius Gemini into Scorpio Taurus, and so now we're seeing these eclipses unfold conjunct the nodes, of course, which is what an eclipse is, and how those energies are playing out. So how do you see that showing up now that we've got the eclipses coming?
Well, in general, and I probably said this before, but I don't recall, is, you know, Scorpio is everything that's hidden. It's everything that is remanded to that portion of our unconscious that we don't want to deal with because we consider it taboo. And taboo changes with, you know, the mores of the time, social and all that. However, you know, there are certain things, if we look at it as simultaneous to a certain extent with the Jupiter Neptune, because that'll last a year or whatever, I mean, you know, until they meet again in the next sign. But the nodal is a year and a half, so it started last December or January, depending on whether you're looking at the true or the, I think the true node was in January, so it's just a few months, so they're going to run together. But what I think is interesting is that, you know, Scorpio is bringing up all of this crap, you know, and if you move from the south node to the north node in Taurus, you want serenity, you want calmness, you want peace. You know, it's not unity necessarily, but Venus is the planet of relationship, you know, and encompasses also Libra, which is partnership. So, you know, anything that comes up that we're not in consciousness about because it's been so buried. And, you know, this is a classic propagandist thing, like Putin saying that the Ukrainians are Nazis. You know, it's like, no, honey, it looks to the rest of the world who's not propagandized in your neck of the woods like you're the Nazi. You know, and we see this kind of projection all the time, but it's particularly relevant right now. So, you know, that factors into it. The eclipse on the 30th is going to be at 10 degrees and 28 minutes of Taurus. So, you know, I did a little refreshing of my memory, but just to tell everyone a little bit of background, right? The Saros series cycle is something that Bernadette Brady, the traditional astrologer, categorized. And she wrote a book called Predictive Astrology, The Eagle and the Lark, back in the early 90s, right? And so a Saros series cycle, of which there's 19, the cycles of the eclipses repeat themselves approximately every 18 years. So if you look back to say, where is 10 to 11 degrees of Taurus in my chart, and you go back 18 years, you'll see one that an eclipse that occurred maybe in the same house within 10 degrees of that. So it could be, you know, 0 Taurus, or it could be forward to 20 Taurus. I'm not sure which direction it goes, probably back. But in any case,
it's themes. It's a theme that repeats.
It's a theme. So clearly it's a Taurus theme, which, as we, you know, as we said, the key word really when I first started studying astrology for Taurus was serenity. So if you just think, you know, that word just makes me see like, you my child is a baby sleeping, you know, in his bed. Or for those of us who have and love our pets, you know, we are always posting these pictures of the cat snuggled up, or the dog and the cat snuggled up. You know, it's serenity, right? I mean, it's total harmony, you know, and
simplicity.
Simplicity, absolutely. Yeah. Well, you know, that is the blissful sleep of a pet or a child or a baby or even an older person is simplicity, right? You know,
yeah,
we can't survive without you know, sleep.
Right.
Or calm. You know, there's so much trauma.
Basic human functions that are part of the rhythms of nature, and Taurus just brings us back to that simplicity of what are the simple things that we need for life. Right. What are the rhythms and the routines and the ways that we structure and understand things? And then Scorpio being the opposite of that, Scorpio opposing Taurus.
Right. And what'll happen for all of us is that, you know, if an eclipse falls within a certain range, and there's disagreements about this. I mean, the traditional astrologers talk about, you know, 1.5 to 2.5 degrees within a specific point in your chart, whether it's a planet or whether it's an angle or even an asteroid or whatever. But if it's not close to anything, it's still in a house. So you look at the meaning of the house, and you know, now solar eclipses, which is what the April 30th one will be, generally tend to manifest externally. Mm-hmm. Lunar eclipses, which we'll have on May 16th it's going to be 25 degrees Scorpio, 18 minutes, will be more emotionally felt or more internally felt. And the other thing that I learned long ago, and this is something that Bill Meridian, who wrote a book about eclipses, said years ago, is that their themes tend to manifest about 3 weeks before. So if we're looking at that, then we're saying that, you know, I think it's April 9th or something. If the eclipse is on the 30th, somewhere around April 9th, you might start to, especially after the eclipse, go back in your mind a couple of weeks or a month or whatever and say, what started to come up around then, you know, and then you peg that maybe to the themes of the house. But the eclipses will be in opposite signs, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, you've always got the polarity thing going. You've got the change.
Just as a reminder, what an eclipse is it means that the lunation, which is either the new moon or the full moon, falls in the same plane as the Earth's orbit around the sun. So that's why it can create a shadow, which is typically how we know there's an eclipse. But mathematically and astrologically, we also know it's because it's close to the moon's nodes, which are where the orbit of the moon crosses the orbit of the Earth. So that's, you know, maybe not everybody wants to understand all those technical details, but the point is that there is an alignment that is more aligned. I always like to call it extra aligny alignment.
I love it.
That kind of is almost like a lock in a key. You know, it kind of, something clicks, something, you know, the light can shine through places where it couldn't before. And so there's like a bridge, there's a portal that gets opened, and these energies can move more easily. So again, it all comes back to healing, and healing comes back to your own positive intentions. So if you're and your consciousness, if you're conscious about what's important to you, you're setting clear intentions about what you want to align with. And then when this energy comes through, it can support changes and shifts in that direction. So the evolutionary impulse can propel you forward on your evolutionary path, as opposed to if you're not conscious, if you are not anchored in what's important to you and grounded in what you want and why you're here and why you're doing the things you're doing, the big picture, then it can propel you toward the crash and burn of
Right.
what
Right.
it is you have to learn. You know, okay, you haven't gotten this lesson yet. Let's make it a little hard. You know?
Yeah. And with the Jupiter Neptune conjunction, you know, so recent, right before the eclipse, I would say too that what you were talking about before, the dark side or the shadow side of Jupiter energy is hubris, what the Greeks called hubris, which is arrogance. And so that's the fall from grace, right? When one is too arrogant, one takes the fall from grace. So, you know, we want to be careful about, well, the only other thing I wanted to say about the fact that the eclipses are related to the nodes is that the nodes are karmic, right? And the way that you and I believe, agree that karma is that we may not be able to go back and change the karmic past, but we have the opportunity, like you were saying, to change the future. So, you know, things were fated because they already happened. So, of course, you know, whether you believe they were meant to happen or not meant to happen isn't really relevant anymore because they did happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can control more. We can control more than I think a lot of us think how we choose to deal with circumstances today that are the product of past choices, and then make different choices to go forward and change that path to be more positive for us. And that's enlightenment. Right?
Or at least on the path to enlightenment.
Yeah. I mean, you know, none of us are gonna, you know what I mean? It's too hubristic to think we're all gonna reach enlightenment, you know, or nirvana or whatever, you know. It's like, just believe you're going to heaven and whatever. You find out later what happens. You know, I'm a Taurus. I always used to say I'm a 9th house Taurus, which is Jupiter's house. I always just say, you know, when you were having those little conversations, either in high school or in college, you know, where everybody's sitting around talking about, you know, philosophy or whatever. And it's like, you know, are there 1,000 souls on the head of the pin, you know, whatever. And people like, what happens when you die? Right. And I'd be like, I don't know, you just die. And then when you've dead, you find out if there's life after death. Like, why should I waste a lot of time? You know, it's like, let's go get some cinnamon buns instead of wasting a lot of time wondering what's going to happen. Yeah. When nobody can prove it. But it brings up one other point, which is that in also the things that we both mentioned, the Crimean War and the Civil War in the United States, that in the 1840s and early 50s, spiritualism took hold. Yeah. And so that's a very interesting thing too, to me, because people started to believe that spirits existed. Now, people believe spirits existed through time immemorial. So that's not new. But what was new kind of was the fact that these two girls started hearing knockings on the wall in this family home up in upstate New York. And I won't go into the whole story, but it was later discovered that it was a hoax. But more philosophical minded people, and when I researched this, I was like, a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, was one of them. Mm-hmm. They became spiritualists because they believed that spirits existed, that they had information to pass on to us, that they had insight or perhaps actually information straight from God, which is very much in alignment with Jupiter, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And that they were benign. They were basically benign. They were helpful things. And that I think is interesting to think about now, because I know a lot of my listeners, I talk a lot about intuition and psychic capability. And I do believe we all have it. And it's just a matter of A, recognizing it, and B, not being afraid of it, and then using it to our advantage. Right. You know, instead of letting it cause us to become confused.
Right. So, and understanding what it is that we might call intuition, or you're talking about philosophy, and philosophy is very Jupiterian, and how, but how we see ourselves and our capabilities. And it's one of the things I love so much about astrology is that we have this balance. We have this ability to connect with intuition, with psychic abilities or spirituality, or what, you know, however that we each view that. But then we also have this very Taurian perspective, right? Which is practical. I'm just here with my cat, you know, this is
right. Taking a nap.
Yeah. Taking a nap.
Nappy cat.
But also, I think Taurus is the things that we do every day. You know, it's the routines that you would do on a farm, you know, feeding the animals, to harvest, all the sort of the ways that we ground in the rhythms of nature and the seasons and the daily things that have to be done. And how does that translate into our modern lives? It shows up as our routines, you know, we all have different routines, but it might be going to work. It might be, you know, getting on your Zoom call in the morning, but it's that part of life that's like, okay, what's the next step? What's the next step? What's the next step? What do we do now? And having that routine that balances this thing that's way beyond routine.
Well, I think I'm sorry.
Yeah, just way beyond the physicality of things. And that's the Neptune energy, the Pisces energy, and to some extent the Jupiter energy.
Right, yeah. Right. Well, Jupiter, Venus is Taurus in particular. To me, it's about the physical body. So as you say, it's related to Mother Earth. It's related to the cycles of life, which is planting the seed, you know, tending it as it grows, and then reaping it, and then using it for sustenance. But it also tends to represent, because it represents the physical side of life, Taurus represents what gives us pleasure. And therefore, what pleases us is what we tend to most value. Yeah. So getting in greater touch with our values, particularly with this eclipse in Taurus, as it falls into a particular house, is really important for us, because again, it might not be what we thought it was, because we were taught on a more ego-oriented Saturnian level what, you know, it's supposed to be, or what it has to be. And Jupiter has, you know, gives us the ability to expand that consciousness into saying, well, you know, I was taught that having a job and working until I'm 65 or 70 and, you know, putting all this money in the bank. I always think of Scrooge, you know, the Christmas Carol. And then find out that you have nobody and you're going to die alone. You know, in that case, yeah, you better believe in heaven so that you can have somebody to talk to, you know, so there's other people around you. But the downside of that is, of course, when Taurus is lazy, because it doesn't want change, because what it's doing feels too good. You know, it's sort of like, you know, this feels good. Why would I change it? You know?
So for the Taurus eclipse coming up, the new moon, which is the moon conjunct the sun. So that's more of that externally manifested, but it's also the beginning of a cycle. And the new moon is the seed planting time. So that is a really important time to anchor your intentions to, and that can be as simple as just affirming, you know, I want to feel peace in my body. You know, I want to have more time to take care of myself. A simple intention of what's important to you, and a nice deep breath into that intention anchors that. It plants that seed so that you are aligning, you are saying, with the evolution of this moon cycle, these eclipses, I want to have support for having meaningful transformation in my life that helps me manifest more of this. And then the things that unfold from there can support that evolution. Sometimes that's comfortable, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's downright stressful or painful. But that's maybe that pain, if it happens, is bringing up something that you need to see that's getting in your way. so something that's saying, here I am, and you need to shift your consciousness, bring in more love, find tools and approaches for yourself for dealing with the energy of the thing that's challenging you. And maybe that was the invitation that is going to help you shift. So, so, and of course, like you were saying, where that Taurus energy falls in your chart is going to be how it shows up for you personally. So it's going to be a bigger deal for some of us than others of us, depending on where our sort of life natal chart evolutionary work is for each of us personally. And
yeah, no, go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Venus is right now in Pisces. You mentioned the other, Mercury in Pisces, and Jupiter and Neptune. And I had said that Venus is going to meet Neptune prior to this eclipse, because obviously it'll be moving on into Taurus, as will Mercury, I think, right? But in any case, it's probably right now not a bad idea. It's always a good idea to meditate, right? But I think water is particularly not imperative, but for those who crave it or gravitate towards it, leading up to this eclipse, I think, is a good time to be near water, to take a bath, to shower, to even if it's like, we were just saying, Marina and I, before we started the recording, that it's cold where both of us are, and we're both on different coasts. So it's kind of bizarre right now, but to take a walk by the ocean, if you live in a coastal region, the river, the lake, whatever, that can be very soothing and calming, as well as just regular meditation and yoga or any of the things that anyone does to relax, because that helps the body relax. And that helps bring in some of, the more Uranian type revelations and Jupiterian, growths in enlightenment or consciousness. I do want to say one thing before I know we have some time left, but just so that people know, and that's that each eclipse comes from a different family or Saros series cycle. And again, it was Bernadette Brady who categorized these cycles, and that this particular one has a meaning. And I'm going to quote from her, because I wrote it down, that this family of eclipses, which means both the April 30th and the May 16th, is concerned with the individual's relationship with father figures, authority figures, or the need to take responsibility and control. Now, right away, we can see, so hard on the heels of Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Pisces, right? Hello, take responsibility. This is a time to accept the commitments that are presented, commitments which could occur due to another person's illness or unreliability. Now, I'm not saying that we need to interpret that literally, but I would, prefer to talk about it metaphorically. And also just to mention that transiting Saturn's been squaring the nodal axis in the sky. And that asks us also to reevaluate our commitments, particularly to authority figures. So are we having a lot of delusion about who's our hero? And is that grounded in factual truth because they actually did engage in heroic acts? Or do they just talk a big game because they're hubristic type personalities? And some of those people are on the world stage, and some of them might live with us. Right. So we want to be a little bit clearer about where we place our, trust.
Some of them might be inside of us.
Well, exactly, because we manifest the entire world around us. So, this goes into duality and all that stuff, I always say, well, Cain and Abel, hello, right, left and right.
Yeah, I love that. I love that sense of, because I think that's been a theme of the past few years, actually, is this, well, we had the Saturn Pluto conjunction in 2020 with Jupiter going through Capricorn as well. And the energy of where are we looking to for our answers? And are we relying on that father figure to guide us, to tell us what is so, to, you know, because some of our father figures are failing us, right? Some of our authority figures, some of our political figures.
Absolutely.
And so again, the evolutionary invitation is, how do we need to look within ourselves to ask, you know, wait a minute, does this jive with what I know to be true? And how do I need to listen to my own truth, to my own heart, to my own knowing of things like, you know, kindness really creates positive change in my life, in my world, and what is the difference between kindness and cruelty, and how do we look at authority figures and just what are we expecting from the world? What are we expecting the world to provide for us? And how are we listening to ourselves as the authority figures and shifting that locus of where the authority comes from?
Right, that's perfectly put. But I think also the larger meaning includes finding the father or the parent within us. And, you know, does father, who is, you know, if we're looking at traditional roles, right? Father's a bit more boundaried, father's a bit more restrictive. Now, things have changed so drastically only over the last 50 years or so that that's no longer true. But where are we sometimes too harsh on ourselves, too restrictive, too judgmental? Because of course the mother is, you know, stereotypically more more nurturing. So if we're not looking at them as actual people, we're looking at them as concepts. So where are we very hard on ourselves? And, you know, one of the things I've noticed in client work and just observing the world and friends and people is, you know, family is how that inner voice can be so nasty.
Yeah.
And how many people would never, ever say anything to another human being that they think about themselves.
Right.
So this is an opportunity to say, okay, I want to be the best father of myself that I could possibly be. How can I do that?
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
It's like, again, you know, practical Taurus, right? And Virgo is like, make a list.
Yeah.
You know, stop calling yourself an idiot, you know. Stop looking in the mirror and thinking you're fat, you know.
Yeah,
maybe you are fat, but who cares? You're still a human being who deserves respect. You know, that kind of stuff. It's like,
yeah, absolutely. And a couple more things I wanted to touch on. I think you had mentioned, and the Pluto changing directions right before the April 30th eclipse, and also Jupiter going into Aries. So Jupiter is actually moving out of Pisces and into Aries between these two eclipses and right before the second one. So we've got that, you know, first of all of the planets, as we're recording this, all the planets are direct, have been direct for several weeks. And that gives us a forward movement. We're taking action, we're stepping forward, we're experiencing the world, we're experiencing things externally, we're working things out externally in the choices and actions that we make in the world around us. And when planets go retrograde, it takes that energy inward. There's more of a reflection, there's more of a review, recovering of ground we've been over, but it goes inward for processing. And so with the Pluto station, we've got that heightened Pluto energy during the time that it's changing directions.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your take on how that impacts the Taurus?
Well, I think that, you know, in terms again of archetypal meaning, I mentioned Pluto's about the all things taboo that we store in our unconscious, which is, you know, the metaphor for that is the underworld, because Pluto's the god of the underworld. Is that when we talk about Pluto in that context, we're talking about self-empowerment. Right. So I always think of it that way. So as Pluto goes retrograde, retrogrades are times, at least on the psychological level, to go inward. We already know we're in Pisces right now. Like I said, you know, water inward is we're again doubly called to go with the South Node in Scorpio now, inward, to bring into consciousness all these taboo things. And it does relate somewhat to what I said before about how, you know, we might think that we suck. Everyone else is great, but we suck. And so where does that, you know, why isn't it taboo? You know, why are we not saying, let's bring this out into the light, figure out why I think I suck? You know, again, you know, go back to just the very basics of Neptune and Pisces and Jupiter. It's like you're just a baby floating in utero. You don't, you know, there's no taboo there. You're just whoever, you know, you're just one with all of mankind. The Jupiter thing moving into Aries, because of the circumstances now, I think it's the time, you know, Aries is ruled by Mars, always about the inner warrior. Jupiter about expanding your ability to find the inner warrior. So where in your life might you need to bring that to the forefront? I think, unfortunately, the external world is going to show us a little bit more of conflict over belief systems, meaning including religious belief systems, as was mentioned. So I think the more that might be true and manifest, and we'll have to wait and see, the more it's showing us the divisiveness of the external world so that we can go inward, find our inner warrior, and heal that division internally. Yeah.
And it's bringing it from that Jupiter in Pisces, which is transcendence, unity, the great ocean of being, into Aries, which is new beginnings, action, forward movement, risk taking. So there's kind of a rebirth that is possible, especially in terms of our beliefs, our convictions, the things that we want to align ourselves with. So yeah, so the potential for conflict is definitely there. But again, if we're coming back to this place of why am I doing this? Why is this important to me? And looking at that more deeply, not just I believe in this thing, so I'm going to defeat my enemies because they don't believe in it, but more from a place of what is the thing that is truly important to me, and what is it that I want? Why do I want that? And is this path of confrontation or conflict really the most effective way of getting it, or is there another way of going about that? And that's the shift in consciousness. Is there another way? Listening, creativity, creative solutions, taking a step back, seeing alternatives. Those are all also good Aries decisive choices. You know, I'm going to do it this way. And I'm just seeing our time. I know we need to wrap up here.
I think we need to wrap up. Yeah, we got like 2 minutes, I think, right?
Okay. Yeah. So,
but that's cool. I gave my information. Did you give everybody your information, how they can contact you?
Yeah, so I'm at astrologyheals.com and I'm doing mini readings. If you're interested in finding out where these eclipses fall in your chart, how they show up for you, check it out, astrologyheals.com. And you want to go to the Work with Marina page to find a link to schedule those mini readings and get a recording that gives you more insight into how it's showing up in your chart. Astrologyheals.com. I've been doing this since 1995, 4, 3, something
Whoa.
like that.
Whoa, you got me beat.
Yeah.
I've been studying since 2001, but practicing since 2008. So, and I have a 1-hour special offer for $99 for a 1-hour discounted karmic evolution natal insight reading. So if anyone is interested in that, and that focuses on, you know, both, as I said before, the psychological and the evolutionary patterns in our chart and how we may be acting a little more unconsciously in terms of the behavioral patterns that we express, that we might want to find out what are the derivation of those patterns and how we can maybe change them up or see them through a new lens and develop a new perspective about how to go forward to reach our highest destiny, which of course is our North Node in this lifetime. So, but thank you so much, Marina. This is great. I'm going to play this on my show, which airs tomorrow at 2:00 Eastern and 11 a.m. Pacific. But this is a wonderful opportunity, and I look forward to the next time we get together.
Me too. Thank you so much. And I'll see you next time.
Okay. See you next time, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go.